The courtroom was a tomb, silent except for the shuffling of billion-dollar lawsuits. On one side sat Richard Aaron, a titan of industry, smirking at his mistress in the front row. On the other, his wife, Mary, a woman who looked as pale and fragile as a pressed flower. Everyone in New York knew the story. The powerful husband was dumping his quiet, simple wife for a younger model. The hearing was a formality, a simple severance. But they forgot one thing. Still waters run deep, and the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. The air in courtroom 3B of the New York County Supreme Court was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and contained ambition. It was, by all accounts, the most boring high-profile divorce of the decade. Richard Aaron, CEO of Aaron Holdings, sat at the defendant's table as if it were his own boardroom. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of dark charcoal wool from a tailor on Savile Row. His silver hair was perfect, and his posture radiated an effortless, brutal dominance. He represented new money, but he wore it with the arrogance of old aristocracy. Beside him sat his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a shark from the prestigious firm of Sterling and Croft, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, and whose billing rate was higher than a small country's GDP. They murmured to each other, sharing a quiet joke. In the gallery, just behind them, sat Sienna. Sienna was the catalyst. She was everything Mary was not, vibrant, sculpted, and radiating a confidence that bordered on aggressive. She wore a tight, blood-red dress that was scandalously inappropriate for a court proceeding, and she was actively texting, a smug smile playing on her lips. She was the public upgrade, the woman Richard was parading around Manhattan before the ink on his divorce papers was even dry. And then, at the plaintiff's table, there was Mary Aaron. To the reporters crammed into the back benches, Mary was a ghost. She wore a plain, high-collared grey dress that looked like it had been purchased from a forgotten department store. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore no makeup. She clutched a battered, old-fashioned leather briefcase on her lap, her knuckles white. She looked terrified, out of her depth, a woman who had wandered into a wolf's den by mistake. "Look at her," one journalist whispered to another. "He's going to eat her alive. Thorne will have her agreeing to pay him by lunch." Richard Aaron had built an empire from nothing. Aaron Holdings was a behemoth in real estate and private equity. He was ruthless, and the world respected him for it. Mary, his wife of 15 years, was a footnote. She was the quiet wife, the one he brought to dull charity galas. She organized his closets, approved menus for his dinner parties, and was never, ever heard speaking above a polite murmur. Richard had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The reality, everyone knew, was Sienna. He had offered Mary a settlement, a one-time payment of $5 million and the apartment she was currently living in. It was, as the New York Post had blared, a $5 million insult, considering his estate was valued at over $9 billion. Mary had refused the settlement. This hearing was the result. Richard was furious. He was having the refusal dealt with. Marcus Thorne was here to paint Mary as an unstable, grasping woman, to have the judge force the more than generous settlement through, and to have the marriage officially terminated, so Richard could install Sienna as the new Mrs. Aaron. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Alistair Cromwell entered. He was an older man with a reputation for sharp intellect and zero tolerance for theatrics. He settled in, put on his glasses, and looked over the docket. "Case 94B, Aaron v. Aaron," he said, his voice dry. "Mr. Thorne, I've read your brief. You're motioning to enforce the settlement agreement. Do you wish to add anything?" "Yes, Your Honor." Thorne stood, his voice smooth and commanding. We believe the plaintiff, Mrs. Aaron, is not acting in good faith. The offer on the table is extraordinarily generous, considering Mrs. Aaron brought nothing into this marriage and contributed nothing to Mr. Aaron's financial success. She was a homemaker. He said the word homemaker with a sneer, as if it were a synonym for parasite. She has no head for figures, Your Honor, Thorne continued. We have psychiatric evaluations that suggest she is prone to fantasy. We believe she is being manipulated by her counsel into this fishing expedition. He gestured to Mary's lawyer, Anne Holloway. If Mary was a mouse, Holloway was a sparrow. She was a small, middle-aged woman in a rumpled brown suit, the kind of lawyer who usually handled public defender cases, not billion-dollar divorces. Richard Aaron smirked. This was perfect. The optics were perfect. The terrified wife and her bargain bin lawyer versus the titan and his shark. Ms. Holloway, the judge said, turning to her. Your response to the motion? Anne Holloway stood. The room leaned in, expecting a weak, reedy protest. Your Honor, Holloway said, her voice surprisingly clear and steady. We reject the settlement, and we reject Mr. Thorne's assessment of my client, but most of all, we reject the premise of this entire hearing. Thorne actually laughed. The premise, Your Honor? The premise is a divorce. No, Mr. Thorne, Holloway said, turning to face him. The premise is the division of assets, and we are here to argue that the assets known as the Aaron estate are not, in fact, Mr. Aaron's property to divide. A murmur went through the courtroom. Richard Aaron stopped, smiling. That's a bold claim, Ms. Holloway, Judge Cromwell said, leaning forward. On what grounds? On the grounds, Your Honor, Holloway said, that the entirety of Aaron Holdings was built on a foundation of fraud, theft, and conspiracy, and we are here to prove it. The silence in the courtroom was no longer respectful. It was absolute, crackling shock. Sienna had stopped texting. Richard Aaron's face had gone from smug to stony. Your Honor, Thorne boomed, this is an outrageous, slanderous tactic. This is a divorce court, not a commercial litigation forum. She is trying to poison the well. Is she? Judge Cromwell asked, his eyes fixed on Mary, who had not moved, her hand still gripping the leather briefcase. Or is she establishing the true value, or lack thereof, of the marital assets? Proceed, Miss Holloway. But be warned, this had better lead somewhere. Thank you, Your Honor, Holloway said. I'd like to call my first witness to the stand. And who would that be? Mary Aaron. The walk from the table to the witness stand was only 10 feet, but Mary Aaron made it feel like a mile. She moved with a strange, deliberate calm. The trembling woman from the hallway seemed to have evaporated, replaced by someone rigid and focused. She placed her worn leather briefcase on the table beside the stand, took the oath, and sat. Mrs. Aaron, Anne Holloway began, please state your name and your relationship to the defendant. My name is Mary Aaron. I am the wife of Richard Aaron. Her voice was low but perfectly clear. No quiver. No fear. Richard watched her, a flicker of genuine confusion on his face. This was not the woman he knew. The woman he knew cried when he raised his voice. The woman he knew apologized when he was wrong. Mrs. Aaron, Thorne interrupted, standing up. Your Honor, must we listen to this? Her lawyer has made an insane accusation. Let them present a document, a piece of evidence, not the ramblings of a scorned woman. Mr. Thorne, sit down, Judge Cromwell snapped. You will have your turn on cross-examination. Ms. Holloway, you have the floor. Thank you, Holloway said. Mrs. Aaron, Mr. Thorne has painted you as a simple homemaker. Is that an accurate description of your contribution to the marriage?" Mary looked at her husband. For the first time, she made direct eye contact. Richard felt an actual jolt, a cold shock at the sheer emptiness in her gaze. It was not hatred. It was not love. It was the look a biologist gives a specimen under a microscope. "I was a homemaker, yes," Mary said. "I managed the properties. I managed the staff. I also managed the archival of all of Mr. Aaron's business dealings, his calendars, and his private correspondence for the last 15 years. Thorne's head snapped up. "Objection! Relly Aaron." "Overruled," Cromwell said. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne, or I'll have you removed for contempt." Holloway continued. "And in your role as archivist, did you come across information pertaining to the founding of Aaron Holdings?" "I did," Mary said. "And what did you find?" Mary finally unlatched the battered leather briefcase. The entire room watched, expecting, "What? Manila envelopes? Secret photos?" She pulled out a single, slim, modern hard drive. "Your Honor," Mary said, her voice resonating with newfound strength, "Aaron Holdings was founded 15 years ago on the acquisition of a company called Callaway Innovations. That company was owned by my father, Dr. Aris Callaway." The press members in the back scrambled for their notepads. This was not public knowledge. Mary's maiden name had been buried for years. "Callaway Innovations," Mary continued, "was a pioneer in predictive market analysis algorithms. My father was a brilliant man, but not a businessman. He had a junior partner, a man who managed his books, a man he trusted with everything, a man who, 2 years after joining the company, my father introduced to me." She pointed a single, steady finger at her husband. "That man was Richard Aaron." Richard was on his feet. "This is a lie, a complete fabrication. She's hysterical." "Mr. Aaron, one more outburst and you're in the holding cell," Judge Cromwell roared. "Sit down." Thorne, for the first time, looked genuinely worried. He leaned in and whispered furiously to Richard, who shook his head, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Go on, Mrs. Aaron," the judge said. "My father's company," Mary said, "imploded. A series of bad investments, an audit that found massive irregularities, and a sudden, catastrophic loss of his core patent. He was ruined. He lost everything. 6 months later, he took his own life." The courtroom was frozen. "I was devastated," Mary said, her voice now holding a trace of the old pain. "Richard was there to comfort me. He said he had tried to save my father, but Eris was too far gone. Richard said he wanted to take care of me. We were married 3 months later. A year after that, he launched Aaron Holdings, using a new, revolutionary software as its basis. He'd developed it himself, he said." "And had he?" Holloway asked. "No," Mary said. "He had stolen it. This hard drive," she held it up, "is a complete digital copy of my father's original work, the work Richard claimed had been lost in a server crash. I found the original drive hidden in a false bottom of my father's old desk, which I had kept in storage. The timestamp on the patent files predates the launch of Aaron Holdings by 2 years. The algorithm that built Richard's $9 billion empire was not his. It was my father's." "Objection! Objection!" Marcus Thorne was apoplectic, his polished veneer completely shattered. "Your Honor, this is theatre, a grieving daughter's fantasy. This is a 15-year-old baseless claim. It has no place in this divorce hearing." Judge Cromwell held up a hand. "Mr. Thorne, are you Mr. Oren's legal counsel or his publicist? This is a hearing to determine the division of marital property. If the entire marital property was founded on stolen assets, then it is relevant. If, as you say, it's a fantasy, Then you'll have no trouble disproving it on cross-examination. I'm allowing this evidence to be entered as Plaintiff's Exhibit A." A clerk took the hard drive from a stone-faced Mary. "Now, Mrs. Aaron," Holloway continued, "you found this drive." "When?" "10 years ago," Mary replied. The shock in the room was palpable. Richard Aaron, who had been composing himself, paled. 10 years?" he stammered, forgetting to speak to his lawyer. "Yes," Mary said, turning to him. 10 years. I found it when I was moving our things into the new penthouse. I found my father's old desk, the one you so generously offered to keep for me. And I found the hidden compartment. And I found the drive." "And what did you do?" Holloway asked. "At first I was confused. Then I was ill. I confronted Richard." She looked at her husband. "Do you remember that night, Richard?" "July 14th. I came to your study. I showed you the drive. I asked you what it was." Richard was silent, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "He told me I was being sentimental and stupid," Mary said to the court. "He told me my father was a failed man, and that I was lucky he, Richard, had been there to salvage anything. He told me to forget it, or I'd end up just as broken as my father. He took the drive, or so he thought." "What do you mean?" Holloway asked. "He took a decoy. I had already cloned it. That night I realized my marriage was a lie. My husband was the man who had destroyed my father and built an empire on his grave. But I also knew. I knew he was dangerous. He had covered his tracks perfectly. The audit that ruined my father? The key witnesses had all retired to non-extradition countries. The server data was corrupted. A single hard drive from a dead man wouldn't be enough. He would have destroyed me. So what did you do?" "I stayed," Mary said simply. "I stayed. And I became the perfect, quiet, simple wife. I became the person he wanted me to be. A person who wasn't smart enough to be a threat. A person who wouldn't be looking. And as his devoted, simple wife, I archived everything. I backed up every server. I read every email. I noted every offshore bank transfer. I sat in on meetings and took polite notes. For 10 years I gathered the thread." Thorne, who had been furiously scrolling through his phone, suddenly went very still. He had just received a message from his firm. "Your Honor," Thorne said, his voice strained, "I must request an immediate recess. There has been a new development." "Request denied, Mr. Thorne," Judge Cromwell said, his eyes gleaming. "I am finding this testimony fascinating." "Mrs. Aaron," Holloway said, "your husband's empire wasn't just built on this stolen patent, was it?" "No," Mary said. "That was just the seed. To grow it, he had to hide the origins. That meant laundering the initial profits. That meant tax evasion. That meant other things." "Your Honor," Holloway said, "I would like to call my second witness, Mr. James Milner." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a simple grey suit, flanked by 2 men who were clearly not lawyers, walked in. Richard Aaron's jaw dropped. "James, what the hell?" "James Milner," Mary supplied, "was the chief financial officer of Aaron Holdings for 12 years. He was removed 3 years ago when he started asking too many questions." "He was fired for embezzlement," Richard roared, finally losing control. "No," Holloway said. "He was fired for finding the Vanderbilt Global Trust, an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. An entity, Your Honor, that Mr. Aaron used to launder profits and hide assets from the IRS. Mr. Milner has been cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York for the past 18 months. He has full immunity." Thorne collapsed into his chair. "Oh my God! This is a conspiracy!" Richard yelled, pointing at Mary. You did this!" "Yes," Mary said. "I did. I contacted Mr. Milner after you fired him. I gave him the evidence I had collected, and together we went to the federal government." This was no longer a divorce. It was a detonation. Marcus Thorne was in a full-blown panic. His client was not just losing a divorce case. He was being implicated in a massive federal conspiracy. "Your Honor, I must protest," Thorne fumbled, standing and sitting in a spastic motion. "This is an abuse of process. My client is being ambushed. This is a sealed federal case being adjudicated in a civil hearing." "Settle down, Mr. Thorne," Judge Cromwell said, his voice cold as steel. It was a sealed case. It appears the U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with Ms. Holloway, filed a motion to unseal this very morning, contingent on this hearing. A motion which I am granting, nunc pro tunc. This court has been made aware of the concurrent federal investigation and its rele arum to the division of assets. You would have known that, had you read your morning emails. Thorne looked at his tablet with dawning horror. He hadn't checked. He had assumed this was a milk run. "Now," the judge said, "Ms. Holloway, you are alleging that the entire Arron estate is the product of criminal activity. A fruit of the poisonous tree, so to speak?" "That is exactly our position, Your Honor," Holloway said, as James Milner took the stand and was sworn in. Milner was a nervous man, but his testimony was damning. He laid out, in excruciating detail, the network of shell corporations, the falsified invoices, and the offshore accounts. He explained how Richard Arron had systematically cooked the books for 15 years, first to hide the theft of Callaway Innovations, and then to hide the profits from the IRS. The Vanderbilt Global Trust wasn't just a trust. It was a black hole of laundered money. "And how much," Holloway asked, "of Arron Holdings' declared $9 billion valuation is, in your expert opinion, clean?" Milner adjusted his glasses. "In my opinion? None of it. The initial seed capital was stolen. Every profit since has been passed through a fraudulent system to disguise that fact. The entire company is a house of cards." Richard Arron was no longer yelling. He was white, sitting rigidly in his chair, staring at Mary. It wasn't hatred in his eyes now. It was a terrifying, reptilian coldness. He was calculating. He was trapped, and he was looking for a way out. He looked past Mary, into the gallery. He locked eyes with Sienna, his beautiful, young, devoted mistress. He gave her a look, a desperate, pleading, commanding look. "Do something." Sienna, who had been watching the proceedings with a look of bored horror, as if her future shopping sprees were evaporating before her eyes, suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, causing the bailiff to move toward her. "He's not a criminal. Mary is the one. She's obsessed. She's crazy." "Ma'am, you will be silent or be removed," the bailiff ordered. "No," Sienna shrieked. "I won't let her. Richard is a good man. He loves me. He's been trying to protect his assets from her. That's all. She's the thief." Judge Cromwell sighed. "Bailiff, remove that woman from my courtroom." "With pleasure, Your Honor." The bailiff took Sienna's arm. "Wait," Anne Holloway said, her voice cutting through the drama. Everyone froze. "I ask that the court detain Ms. What is her name?" "Sienna Peters," Thorne supplied, confused. "Ms. Sienna Peters," Holloway continued. "We have reason to believe she is a material witness, and not just as the other woman." Sienna stopped struggling. She looked at Holloway, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine fear. "What are you talking about?" Sienna asked. Holloway nodded to Mary. Mary opened her briefcase again and pulled out a single, simple bank statement. "Your Honor," Mary said, her voice carrying the weight of the final execution, "this is a wire transfer confirmation from the Vanderbilt Global Trust. A transfer of $20 million, made 2 weeks ago. It was transferred to a private account in Switzerland." "So he's hiding money with his mistress," Judge Cromwell said, unimpressed. "Hardly a new trick." "Not just hiding it, Your Honor," Mary said. "The account she received it in is under the name Sienna Hayes, not Sienna Peters. And that transfer, it wasn't a gift." Mary looked directly at the mistress. "It was blackmail, wasn't it, Sienna? You weren't just the mistress. You were his private secretary. You found the same offshore accounts I did, and you decided to get your piece of the pie before he dumped you for the next girl." Sienna's face crumpled. The act was gone. The smugness was replaced by raw, bottom-feeding panic. She had been found out. He told me he'd ruin me," she cried, pointing at Richard. "He said if I said anything, he'd—" Richard Aaron let out a sound, a low, guttural roar of pure, animalistic rage. He lunged, not at Mary, but at Sienna. "You stupid little—" The bailiffs were on him in an instant, tackling him before he could cross the bar. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting, cameras flashing. Marcus Thorne put his head in his hands. "Order! Order!" Judge Cromwell bellowed, slamming his gavel. "Bailiffs, restrain Mr. Aaron, Ms. Peters, or Ms. Hayes, or whoever you are. You are now in federal custody. Take her to the holding cell. We will have a 5-minute recess to clear the room and get Mr. Aaron in restraints." As the room cleared, Mary Aaron sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't even blinked. She had simply watched the empire burn. The courtroom reconvened 15 minutes later. The chaos had been replaced by a heavy, funereal silence. Richard Aaron was back at the defendant's table, but he was no longer a titan. He was a man in an expensive suit, flanked by 2 large court officers. His composure was gone. He was visibly trembling with rage. Marcus Thorne looked like he had aged 10 years. Sienna was gone, removed to a holding cell, her high-pitched wails echoing down the hall before fading. "Well," Judge Cromwell said, looking down at the wreckage of the case, "that was illuminating. Ms. Holloway, your client has presented a compelling case that the defendant, Mr. Aaron, has engaged in decades of criminal activity, and that the marital estate is, in fact, built on fraud." "Yes, Your Honor," Holloway said. "However," the judge continued, "this presents a legal quandary. If the entire estate is the fruit of a criminal enterprise, as Mr. Milner's testimony suggests, then it is subject to forfeiture by the U.S. government. The IRS and the SEC will have their claims. The federal government will seize Aaron Holdings. There will be nothing left to divide. Your client will have won her moral victory, but she will be left with the same $5 million apartment Mr. Aaron initially offered." Richard Aaron heard this, and a slow, sick smile spread across his face. He looked at Mary. He'd lost. He was going to prison, but she wasn't winning. She wouldn't get a dime of his money. He'd see it all burned to the ground before she got to touch it. "He's right, you know," Richard whispered, his voice a harsh grate. "You get nothing, Mary. You get nothing. I win. Even from a cell, I win." Mary met his gaze. The mask of calm finally broke, but not into fear. A tiny, slow, cold smile touched her lips. "You really think I'd do all this, just for moral victory, Richard?" she whispered back. "Ms. Holloway," the judge called, not hearing the exchange. "Do you have a response to this? Have you just successfully argued your client into poverty?" "Your Honor," Anne Holloway said, standing for what she knew would be the last time. "That would be the case if my client were only a spouse. But she is not. Thorne looked up, confused. What does that mean? As Mrs. Aaron testified, Holloway explained, the entire $9 billion empire of Aaron Holdings was built on the stolen intellectual property of one man, Dr. Aris Calloway. Yes, her father. A tragic story, the judge said. But that claim would be civil, and the statute of limitations ran out a decade ago. Not if the fraud was actively concealed, Your Honor, Holloway countered smoothly. Which, as we have established, it was. And in a federal forfeiture case, the government often seeks to make the original victims of the crime whole. The original victim is deceased, counsel, the judge said. He is, Holloway agreed, but he has an heir, a sole, living heir, who has been the target of the conspiracy to conceal the original crime for the last 15 years. A new sound filled the room. It was the clicking of a dozen different puzzle pieces falling into place at once. Your Honor, Holloway continued, we are not here today as just Aaron Vova Aaron. The U.S. Attorney's Office, on behalf of the primary victim and whistleblower, Mary Calloway Aaron, has filed a petition. We are not asking for a division of assets. We are asking for restitution. Richard's smile vanished. Restitution? The government, Holloway said, her voice ringing with finality, has agreed. The Vanderbilt Global Trust, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, all of that is forfeit. It is poisoned. But the company itself, the infrastructure, the buildings, the patents, the brand, all of it is the proceeds of the initial crime against Dr. Calloway. The government does not wish to run a real estate empire. It only wishes to see justice done and its taxes paid. What are you asking for, Miss Holloway? The judge asked, though his eyes showed he already knew the answer. We are asking the court to recognize Mary Aaron not as the wife of the defendant, but as the primary creditor of the criminal enterprise. We are asking for the fraudulent transfer of Calloway Innovations to Aaron Holdings to be voided. And we are asking for the entirety of the clean assets, once seized and cleared of their fraudulent shell, to be transferred to their rightful owner. She gestured to Mary. Her. Marcus Thorne was, for the first time in his professional life, speechless. He opened his mouth and closed it 3 times, making a small, fish-like gasp. Your Honor, that is legally preposterous, he finally managed to stammer. She can't. You can't just give her the company. It's community property. It is not community property, Mr. Thorne. Anne Holloway's voice was like a whip crack. It is stolen property. You cannot have a community interest in a criminal enterprise. My client has been living for 15 years as a hostage to the man who destroyed her father and stole her legacy. She has, at great personal risk, painstakingly built the entire case that the U.S. government is now using to prosecute Mr. Aaron. She is the star witness, the primary victim, and the sole heir to the intellectual property that forms the entire basis of the company. Judge Alistair Cromwell looked at the mountain of evidence. He looked at the trembling, defeated form of Richard Aaron, now being held in his chair by 2 officers. He looked at the federal prosecutors who had quietly entered the room and were standing by the back wall, their arms crossed. And then he looked at Mary. She was no longer a mouse. She was no longer a ghost. She sat upright, her hands folded, her gaze level and clear. She had been through a 15-year nightmare, and she had come out the other side holding the blade. She had not come for revenge, he realized. She had come for justice, and she had brought the receipts. Judge Cromwell took off his glasses. He polished them slowly, the only sound in the room, the whisper of cloth on glass. Mr. Thorne, he said. "I have seen some courtroom tactics in my day. I have seen spouses hide assets. I have seen them lie, cheat, and steal. But in 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a case of such profound, sociopathic and predatory fraud as this." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Aaron, your marriage was a sham. Your company is a sham. Your entire life is a monument to your own greed, built on the bones of a good man you destroyed. You took his company, you took his daughter, and you corrupted everything you touched. You did this, as you said, to take care of her. The arrogance is breathtaking." He put his glasses back on. "The federal case against you, Mr. Aaron, for conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering will proceed. Given the evidence I have seen here, I suspect you will be spending the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary." Richard stared blankly ahead, a broken man. "As for the civil matter of Aaron versus Aaron," the judge continued, "I am dissolving this marriage, effective immediately, on the grounds of gross fraud." He picked up his gavel. "I have reviewed the petition from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It is unorthodox, but so are the circumstances. The claim of Mary Calloway Aaron as the primary victim and rightful heir to the originating intellectual property is sound. The government's right to seizure is also sound. Their joint petition is, in my view, the only just and equitable path forward." He looked directly at Mary. "No one expected the quiet wife at the hearing," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "No one, it seems, bothered to look at her at all." He raised his gavel high. "The assets of Aaron Holdings are hereby seized by the federal government. All fraudulent offshore trusts are forfeit. The back taxes and fines will be paid from these liquidated assets. And then, by the agreement of this court and the UGAS, Attorney, I am honoring the petition for restitution." He brought the gavel down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "The remainder of the Aaron Holdings estate, its properties, its trading algorithms, its name, its infrastructure, its stock, is awarded in its entirety to the plaintiff, Mrs. Mary Calloway Aaron, as restitution for the theft that formed its foundation." He paused, letting the words land. "She gets the entire estate." For a full, agonizing 30 seconds, the courtroom was a vacuum. The only sound was the high-pitched, wheezing breath of Richard Aaron. It was the sound of a man who had not just lost, but had been undone. He was looking at Mary, but he wasn't seeing the pale, mousy woman he had married. He was seeing a stranger, a monster. He was seeing a mirror of his own ruthless, calculating ambition, and the sight of it, residing in her, shattered his reality. His world had been built on a simple, immovable foundation. He was the smartest man in every room, and Mary was a piece of furniture. That foundation had just turned to liquid sand. "No," he whispered, the word a dry rattle. "No, it's mine. It's mine." He tried to lunge again, a pathetic, spastic movement against the firm grip of the bailiffs. He was a cornered animal, all instinct and no intellect. "Mary, Mary, baby, please, you can't!" His voice shifted, a desperate, oily attempt at the old manipulation that had worked for 15 years. Tell them you don't want this. We can split it. I'll give you whatever you want. Mary, please." Mary met his gaze. The mask of calm she had worn for 10 years, the mask she had built to survive him, finally dissolved. But it did not break into tears or anger. It simply fell away. Beneath it was not a victim. It was a survivor, forged in steel and ice. "I am my father's daughter," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room like a cannonade. She stood up, her movement fluid and certain. She picked up her empty, battered leather briefcase, the last relic of her old life. Richard saw her dismissal. He saw the finality. The last thread of his manipulative hope snapped, and all that was left was a raw, primal scream of narcissistic rage. "You can't!" he shrieked, his face a terrifying mask of purple and white. "You're nothing. You're a ghost. I made you. It's mine." "Take him away," Judge Cromwell ordered, his voice heavy with disgust. As Richard Aaron was physically dragged, screaming and babbling, out of the courtroom, the federal prosecutors, who had been standing like statues at the back, moved in. Their purpose was swift. One of them, a tall woman with U.S. attorney on her credentials, walked directly to the defendant's table and slapped a new set of cuffs on Marcus Thorne. "Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States, accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Thorne, the shark, the titan of the bar, didn't even protest. He just collapsed into his chair, a weeping, broken man. He had been so focused on the divorce, so arrogant, that he never saw the real case. He'd been out-lawyered, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed by a simple homemaker and a public defender-class lawyer. His career wasn't just over, it was being buried under a federal prison. The courtroom doors banged shut, cutting off Richard's final, incoherent curses. The silence that fell was profound. It was the silence of a bomb site. Judge Cromwell looked at Mary, who was standing beside Anne Holloway, her posture perfect. "Mrs. Aaron." "Miss Calloway," he corrected himself. "I have never seen anything like this. You were not just a victim. You were the guardian of your father's legacy, and you have, at great personal risk, performed a service not only for yourself, but for the public. This court is in your debt." Mary simply nodded, a gesture of mutual respect. She turned and began to walk down the main aisle. The reporters in the gallery, who had been frozen in stunned silence, finally erupted. They scrambled over each other, a chaotic mob, but the bailiffs, now energized, formed a wall, allowing Mary and Anne to pass. They walked through the massive marble hallway of the New York Supreme Court, their footsteps echoing. The air outside the courtroom felt different. "Is it over?" Mary asked, her voice the first sign of a tremor she had shown all day. Anne Holloway stopped and put a hand on her arm. "For him, it's over. The trial will be a formality. He'll die in prison. For you, it's just beginning." Anne smiled, a real, bright smile. "You did it, Mary. My God, you did it. For 10 years. I have to admit, I was terrified for you. I thought he'd find out. I thought he might." "He almost did," Mary said, her voice distant, remembering a night 3 years prior. A night he'd found a locked file, and she'd had to convince him it was a surprise party guest list. The memory made her shiver. "But he never saw me. He only saw the woman he'd invented." She stopped at the great bronze doors of the courthouse and held out the leather briefcase to her lawyer. "I don't think I'll be needing this anymore." Anne took it, her eyes shining with tears. "It was an honor to carry it for you, Mary." Mary took a deep breath. It was the first breath of free air she had taken in 15 years. It tasted like iron and cold city dust, the taste of a prison door finally opening. She pushed the door open. The scene on the courthouse steps was pandemonium. It was a wall of light and sound. Hundreds of reporters, camera crews, and photographers swarmed the steps, a screaming, roaring mass. The case had exploded online. The boring billionaire divorce had become the crime story of the century. "Mrs. Aaron! Mrs. Aaron! How long did you know? Is it true you have the entire estate? What will you do now? Are you the richest woman in New York? The questions were a barrage, a physical assault of sound. Mary stopped on the top step, Anne beside her. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She held up a single pale hand, and the chaos quieted. Not to silence, but to a dull, expectant roar. They sensed it. This was not a victim. This was not a scorned wife. This was power. Mary Calloway stepped up to the forest of microphones. She looked directly into the main camera, her gaze so steady and cold it felt like it could freeze the lens. "My name," she said, her voice not loud but carrying with absolute precision, "is Mary Calloway." The correction was instant and electric. The reporters began scribbling. Today the court rendered a just verdict. But let me be perfectly clear. This was not a divorce. It was an exhumation. For 15 years, Richard Aaron built an empire on the grave of my father, Dr. Aris Calloway. Today, we have placed the tombstone. A stunned murmur went through the crowd. Aaron Holdings, as a corporate entity, is dissolved, effective immediately. This was the kill shot. This was news that would rock Wall Street in seconds. "In its place," Mary continued, her voice rising in strength, "I am establishing the Calloway Foundation. This entity will be funded by the complete and total liquidation of all former Aaron assets. The fraud is being unwound. The poison is being purged." "What will it do?" someone yelled. Mary's eyes found the reporter. The Calloway Foundation has 2 missions. Its first act will be to establish the Aris Calloway Grant for Women in Computational Science, to ensure that brilliant minds like my father's are nurtured, not preyed upon. She paused, letting the noble reason land before delivering the blade. Its second mission is a promise. The algorithm my father built to predict market trends will now be used to predict crime. We will use the full force of my father's genius to find other men like Richard Aaron. We will find the fraudsters, the embezzlers, and the predators who hide in plain sight. We will find them, we will audit them, and we will turn them over to the authorities. The Calloway Foundation is not a company. It is a reckoning. There will be no further comment. She turned, and as if on cue, a sleek, black, unadorned sedan pulled up to the curb. The crowd was frozen, not just by her words, but by the sheer, terrifying power of her promise. She hadn't just taken the money. She had taken the power. She had taken his company and turned it into a weapon aimed at every single person like him. Mary and Anne got into the car. The door closed, shutting out the wall of noise, a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, the silence of the soundproofed car was absolute. Mary Calloway leaned her head back against the leather. She closed her eyes. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Not a tear of sadness or even of joy. It was a tear of completion. The 15-year-old knot of fear, anger, and grief that had lived in her stomach for so long had finally uncoiled. For the first time since she was a girl, Mary Calloway was alone. And for the first time in her life, she was free. The world had changed. The name Aaron was now synonymous with Madoff. The financial and social fallout had been catastrophic, a controlled detonation that Mary Calloway had overseen from a distance. In the Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, Richard Aaron was no longer a titan. He was just inmate 4812B. The custom Savile Row suits were gone, replaced by a dull orange jumpsuit that hung limply on his frame. The silver hair was uncombed, the powerful aura completely extinguished, leaving behind a sallow, trembling, middle-aged man. He sat in a small, sterile visiting booth, looking through a smeared pane of plexiglass at his new lawyer. Not Marcus Thorne. Thorne was in a cell in the same facility, facing his own disbarment and a lengthy sentence. This was a young, overworked public defender named Ben. "I want you to file for a new trial," Richard said, his voice a weak rasp, but still edged with that familiar, hollow arrogance. The judge was biased. The evidence was... It was a conspiracy. My wife, my ex-wife. Mr. Aaron, Ben said, cutting him off, not with malice, but with sheer exhaustion. He flipped a page in his file. "You are not my only client, so let's be quick. There will be no new trial. The evidence is... well, it's a mountain. It's an entire mountain range. James Milner is the prosecution's star witness. Sienna Hayes has taken a deal and is testifying against you. Marcus Thorne, to save his own skin, is testifying against you. The U.S. Attorney's Office has documentation of every illegal wire transfer you've made since 2010. They have you cold." Richard stared. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Ben said, "that they are offering a plea deal. You plead guilty to all 17 counts. They will consolidate the sentences. You'll serve 35 years, with a possibility of parole in 30. If you go to trial, they will seek life without parole, and they will win. 35 years. It was a life sentence. He would be in his 80s. "Did she do this?" Richard whispered, his eyes wide and frantic. "Did did she send you? Is this her deal?" Ben, the public defender, looked genuinely confused. "Who?" "Ms. Calloway." "No. She's not even on the prosecution's witness list. They don't need her. As far as the federal case is concerned, she's just the whistleblower who handed them the box. They have everything else. She hasn't been involved in this for weeks." That was the final devastating blow. It wasn't that she had beaten him. It was that she had moved on. He was a piece of trash she had taken out, and she hadn't given him a second thought. He was no longer relevant to his own story. The titan of industry slumped against the glass, a hollow, empty husk. In a federal processing center in Queens, Sienna Hayes, or rather, Sienna Peters, her real name as it turned out, sat in a deposition room. Her vibrant red dresses were gone, replaced by a drab tan uniform. Her hair was lank, her face scrubbed of makeup. She looked cheap, and she looked terrified. She was facing Anne Holloway. "The $20 million you blackmailed from Mr. Aaron has been clawed back from your Swiss account," Anne said, her voice flat. "It has been forfeited to the Calloway Foundation." "I have nothing," Sienna wept. "He ruined me. I have nothing." "No, Miss Peters," Anne said, closing her file. "You ruined yourself. You were a party to fraud and blackmail. You chose to be a parasite. Richard just gave you the opportunity. The U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed to drop the blackmail charges in exchange for your testimony. You'll serve 18 months for your role in the conspiracy, and then you will be deported back to the UK. Your visa was fraudulent, too. Consider it a mercy." Sienna put her head down on the table and sobbed, the high-pitched wail of a gambler who had lost her final chip. In the former office of Aaron Holdings, Manhattan, the 50th floor corner office no longer felt like a predator's den. The dark, overbearing mahogany and black leather had been ripped out. It was now a space of light wood, glass, and steel. The walls were lined with schematics, data charts, and at the center, a simple framed photograph of a smiling, dark-haired man, Dr. Aris Calloway. Mary Calloway stood at the head of a massive glass conference table. She looked different. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress. She looked strong, rested, and in command. Seated at the table were her new board, Anne Holloway, now General Counsel for the Calloway Foundation, James Milner, the former CFO, now reinstated as her chief financial officer. And at the far end, a brilliant, sharp-eyed woman in her late 20s, Dr. Lena Hansen, the very first recipient of the Aris Callaway grant, now hired to head the Foundation's Ethics in AI division. "The liquidation of the non-core assets is complete," Milner said, tapping his tablet. "The penthouse, the jet, the properties in London and Dubai, all sold. The federal fines and back taxes have been paid in full. The private suits from the other investors Richard defrauded are lining up." "Pay them," Mary said simply. "All of them. Make every person he wronged whole. Use the liquidation funds." "It will cost billions," Anne cautioned. "Then it will cost billions," Mary said. "I don't care about the money. I care about the name. Callaway will stand for integrity." "After all that," Milner said, a small smile playing on his lips, "the Foundation's endowment will still be, well, approximately $5.2 billion. "Good," Mary said. "Then we have work to do. Dr. Hansen tapped her own screen, and a complex algorithm map appeared on the wall. The original Callaway algorithm is..." "Beautiful, Mary. We've refined it. We're already running it against the quarterly reports of 3 major equity firms that Mr. Aaron had dealings with." "And?" Mary asked. "We found anomalies," Dr. Hansen said, her eyes gleaming. "Irregularities in their offshore accounting that match Richard's old patterns almost perfectly. It looks like he wasn't the only one." Mary looked at the map. She looked at the names of the 3 powerful CEOs who, just a month ago, would have considered her invisible. "Flag them," Mary Callaway said, her voice quiet. But now it was the quiet of the center of a storm. "Run the full diagnostic. Then send the data packet to the U.S. Attorney's office, anonymously, for now." The meeting ended. Mary was left alone in the vast, bright office. She walked to the window, looking out over the New York skyline. It was her city, in a way it had never been. She hadn't just taken back her name. She hadn't just gotten justice for her father. She had taken the weapon Richard Aaron had built to rape the world, and she had aimed it back at him and everyone like him. She picked up the photo of her father. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "It's over." She placed the photo back on the desk. She was not smiling. She was not sad. She was simply working. The quiet wife was gone. The Queen had just begun her reign. They thought she was just a quiet wife, a decoration to be discarded. They were wrong. Mary Callaway played the long game, proving that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the smartest. She didn't just win a divorce. She reclaimed her father's legacy and took back everything that was stolen from her. The man who tried to erase her is now just a footnote in her story. What did you think of Mary's ultimate 10-year plan? Was her revenge perfect, or did she wait too long? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you loved this story of karmic justice, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see a quiet hero win. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story from our channel.